May 5th, 1945. Third Reich, under the brand new leadership of Karl Donitz, surrenders to the Allies. Hitler's dead, shot by the Eco. Most of the German High Command escapes with great wealth to Mexico, and the Allies are on the brink of total collapse. This is what happened in our timeline. But what if Germany won, or rather the Axis? This is, in our opinion, what would have happened if an Axis victory was achieved. Just so you know, we are basing this entire scenario off the assumption that most, if not all, of what we laid out in the last video happened. So if you didn't see that, check it out and come back here. Now, onto the scenario. The year is 1950, the conference in Berlin. World War II has now lasted for 12 long years. It has turned into a stalemate. However, a stalemate in the Axis' favor. Britain has fallen. Africa has fallen. China has fallen. All that remains for the Allies in the Old World are small portions and beachheads in India and Africa. The Yankees back home are sick and tired of the war which is sapping away at their men, killing millions but returning nothing. The U.S., who do not have the army to invade any of the Axis powers, wish to end the war. The Axis, whose navy is now non-existent, agrees. The Axis under Germany would be able to secure quite a lot in the peace treaty, as they would pretty much have everything under wraps anyway back in Europe. What the Eco wanted was a powerful and unified Aryan state, potentially spanning the globe. So most of the land that Germany would take, they would have taken directly, with a few puppets holding on to less stable areas. So first things first, the Eco, surprisingly, would let Britain go. The British Isles, that is. The Eco would be afraid that Germany would not be able to keep a proper grip on the English without a strong navy, and the German Reich at this point would have lost most, if not all, of their fleet. The Eco would not want to risk any further destabilizing effects coming into the Reich once the war ended, and because of this, he would not ask for England in the peace treaty, fearful of British resistance later on. Probably the easiest way to do this is go nation by nation. So the Soviets, how do they fare? Unfortunately, not well at all. The Eco was not the only one angry at the Soviets' betrayal of Germany and its people. A great deal of the German High Command, particularly Adolf Hitler and Heinrich Himmler, were furious at the Russians, especially due to the fact that the Russians were overwhelmingly in charge of the Soviet Union. Even under the command of the Eco, those with any World War II knowledge know that Hitler and Himmler were not men that you wanted on your bad side. This has a lot of effects on this world that we'll discuss later. For now, what it means is that Russia no longer exists in any form, and in fact none of the former members in the Soviet Union do. Even to the east, although at first Japan wished to set up several puppet states to help them run the land, Germany forced them to annex former Soviet lands. You'll see this is a recurring theme for Japan to be pissed at the decisions and deals Germany makes throughout the peace deal. However, Japan at this point prioritized their alliance with Germany over all else, due to their reliance on supplies from them and also that no one else would even work with the Japanese at this point. The Soviet Union was split pretty evenly and cleanly, deep into the Urals and Siberia, near Kazakhstan's westernmost border. Germany took the west and Japan the east. And what about France? Well, France, at least the European part, would be straight up annexed by the Reich, with most of their overseas colonies being divided up among Germany's allies. France, like the Soviet Union, would no longer exist. However, the French would not be hated like the Russians and would be able to integrate into German society just fine. All of French North and West Africa would be given to Spain, and all of French Central Africa would go to Germany's new colony, Middle Africa. The few French possessions left in the Atlantic and Caribbean would be given to the British Empire. Finally, all of France's possessions in Asia and the Pacific would go to Japan. Portugal and all of her possessions would be annexed by Spain, while the British Empire is generally divided by all powers. Canada, Australia, and New Zealand would all gain their independence, under the insistence of the Yankees. India and all of Britain's Asian and Pacific colonies would go to Japan for annexation, and all of British Africa would be either taken by Germany or Spain. At this point, the only nation that can really stand up for itself in the peace talks is the U.S., due to their fleet more than anything else. They would be almost completely left off the hook. deciding to establish essentially a white peace with Germany. Japan, once again, would be rather upset that they simply receive only an island or two in the Pacific from the Yankees. Japan's main naval goal and the next step to dominance had been the conquest of the Philippines, which the U.S. denies in this alternate timeline. Several minor nations in the Low Countries, Africa, and Asia are divided and annexed by Germany, Japan, and Spain. Britain would be let go after all their colonies had been stripped away, with no notable differences to their island other than possibly the return of Northern Ireland to the Irish. This map is our best guess at how a world dominated by the Axis powers, led by Germany and funded by Cito, would go. But how would the world fare after this? Not in a good way at all, probably to no one's surprise. These are the Nazis before the reforms of the first and second kings of Cito, and long before the integration of the Bavarians, who had not even been founded yet. And this world, strangely enough, begs the question, would the Sidonians even inherit the Nazis to have the chance to reform them in the first place? Not that they would be reformed regardless, as what led to the reforms within the Nazi Party in Cito was the fact that they had lost the Second World War with such heavy losses and destruction, and they no longer felt as if they could justify an end to the means mentality. They were also in such a desperate state at the end of the war in our timeline that they had to fly under the radar, showing a good face and trying to be forgotten for their past. The attitude of these two titans would come to shape the world in the years to come. But all of that is under the surface. What does the average man see? Pretty divided world, to be fair. England, a mere shadow of its former self, would go to Germany for help. A rather unpopular fascist government propped up by Germany would form, and maintain an unstable and weak grasp upon her populace. Their bid to power would really only be the fact that they were not Nazis themselves, which was true, however, would not be acceptable to the average Brit. Tensions in Britain would slowly and steadily rise as cries for democracy and republicanism would clash with the reinstated black shirts led by Oswald Mosley. Oswald Mosley, while being backed by the Germans and certainly having the resources at his disposal to deal with the rebels within his new nation, would feel rather conflicted. You see, Mosley, while a fascist, was considered by most to be a rather soft member of the Nazi Party. He was a patriot and held the needs of his fellow countrymen before the needs of his ideology, which was quite rare. However, although he would often refuse to fight or gun down British rebels, he would follow practically every other order of the Nazis trying to keep Britain alive. He knew that if the Nazis ever decided that Britain was more trouble than it was worth, they would simply cut ties and starve them out, or even worse, invade them and deny any form of British independence forever. It would be this policy of appeasement and rising revolts in Britain that would drive Mosley and the Nazis to come to an agreement. Britain would now be completely independent, even clarifying this to the world, in exchange for becoming an ally to the Germans, supplying them with naval bases and assisting in the hunt and extermination of the Bavarian Jews, who would have formed the organization sometime around the late 1950s, likely being funded and supplied by Cito at this point. Yeah, I know, the Sidonians in charge of the Nazis. I'll get to them later. One nation at a time, please. In any case, this collaboration with the Nazis would simply fuel the fires in Britain even more, with many feeling like they had surrendered all rights to the Nazis, who were now stationing troops on the Isles. And now that I have covered the most complicated political situation, I will quickly cover the rest. Ireland would join the Axis quite willingly and Turkey reluctantly, becoming new allies of Germany. Saudi Arabia and Switzerland would attempt to stay neutral as long as possible, both fearing that their independence would be threatened as soon as they officially picked a side. All of North and South America, along with Australia and New Zealand, would come together with the Yankees and form the greater collection of states, maintaining all of their individual governments and their rights to govern themselves, but combining their armed forces to better defend themselves from the perceived Nazi threat. Realistically, though, the Nazis would have far more on their plate than the US and her allies. Japan would quickly become Germany's main vocal rival, breaking away from the Axis alliance and forming the Greater East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere. This would consist of Japan, their puppets, namely the Eastern Russian Empire, Mongolia, the Golden Horde, and the Japanese Raj. They would also pick up two mostly independent Chinese and Persian empires, eager to stand against Germany. Persia in particular would want to expand into the land which Germany had taken from Iran in 1950, while Japan would want to expand their Russian puppet further west. Japan's attention would be divided, though, as they would clash with the US in the Pacific for naval dominance, always threatening to reopen a war there. And finally, Spain, while remaining with Germany in the Axis, attempts to strengthen itself and slowly distance themselves from Germany. Wishing to become self-reliant and not having to worry about their aggressive neighbor to the north, Spain would begin talks under the table with Japan and the US should Germany attempt to attack outside their designated sphere of influence. All of these empires and alliances, other than Britain, would be rather stable, believe it or not. At least for now. But now that we know about everyone else, what about Germany? What are they doing, and how are they handling this hostile world? Well, Germany at this point stands as the most powerful nation in the world, with all of the power being held directly by the Eco. The Eco, however, holds a debt to Ceto, who now comes around to claim it. The Eco, well, being the Eco, would refuse and go on a massive purge to hunt down Ceto agents, briefly rocking the German Reich. Ceto would simply go underground, however, with their power greatly reduced and restricted to Germany alone. Their wealth and reputation would remain, however, and Ceto would become the patron of many rebel and partisan groups throughout the Reich. Just like you can become a patron of True History right here. Just click at the link down in the description or type in these very letters on the screen to help support True History in the making of these videos, and you just might like the perks you can get as well, who knows. Now, would the Ceto-Bimarian Union still happen? I highly doubt it. The Ceto-Bimarian Union in our timeline was formed due to the fact that both the Nazis and Jews felt highly oppressed and marginalized, and is quite interesting actually. Please let me know down in the comments below if you want to see a video on the Ceto-Bimarian Union. Anyway, one of the biggest appeals to the Sidonians that the Union seemed to offer was the Jewish manpower, which they simply don't have in this timeline. Both the Jews and Sidonians would be ruthlessly hunted down in this timeline, leading to a lack of manpower for both. Also, the Ceto-Bimarian Union is almost completely credited to one man, and while he would still exist, it is unlikely that he would convert to Judaism, and he certainly would not have met and married the woman who gave birth to his son, credited for holding the tense union together long enough to give it a hope of lasting. So even if the Ceto-Bimarian Union formed, it would be far looser and divided in this timeline, lasting only as long as the Third Reich lasts, or until the king dies, making the Union split peacefully. However, I do not think that the Union matters as much in this timeline until later, as Ceto would still be supplying the Bimarian Jews with the money needed to carry out their actions. Germany would have many internal problems that would be accumulating over the years, threatening to burst out at any point, but being kept under control by the Eco. There would be the Sidonians vying for leadership of the nations, essentially being a split off of the Nazis threatening to spark a civil war. Then you would have the Jews, Poles, and Russians resisting genocide and cultural extermination, threatening to cause widespread revolts across the eastern part of Germany and possibly even in Scandinavia and France if the Jewish underground may remain alive. In the late 1950s, after Britain signs their agreement with Germany, they would begin to feel alone and truly realize they were losing allies. In an attempt to save face and mimic Japan, they would release the Egyptian and Assyrian empires, as well as a rival Persian empire to Japan's ally in the Middle East. It's pretty safe to assume at this point that there is a large coalition of rebel factions both within and without Germany, as well as a small span of alliances ready to combat an aggressive Germany, since it is clear that the Eco is either not willing or not able to have children, leaving Adolf Hitler as his named successor. Adolf Hitler had a vastly different outlook on life and his goals that he wished to aim for. For example, two of Hitler's top priorities were the extermination of the Jews and destruction of Switzerland. The Eco, being Jewish himself, had attempted to stop actions by Hitler and Himmler to kill the Jews, simply wishing for them to be used as slave labor, although he hated his own people for reasons unknown. He did not want to kill them. However, as we all know, that did not stop Hitler from performing his actions against the Jews behind closed doors with the assistance of Himmler. By early 1960, it has become clear to the rest of the world that it is no longer Hitler that is being controlled by the Eco, but rather the Eco is being controlled by Hitler and Himmler. As the Eco's death inevitably draws nearer, the British, Jews, Sidonians, Russians, and Poles plan to revolt in Germany, while Spain seeks Yankee support across the sea, and Japan prepares a full-scale invasion of German-held Russia in the Middle East. What we are left with is a world fully ready to fight World War III, with tensions rising and explosives placed. All that is needed to set the world crashing down once more to the death of millions is the death of one man, the Eco. When he dies and Hitler inherits the nation of Germany, everything, and I do mean everything, hits the fan. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time on True History. If you'd like a part 3 to this, let us know in the comments below, and maybe we'll make one anyway. Who knows? Till next posting, see you all around.